Welcome. It's good to have you. How many of you are so excited to be here today? I'll ask it differently. How many of you want to be here today? No hands at all. Well, that's always a little disconcerting for a speaker, but that's okay. I get it. You know, I did it for years just like you are now, and you know, it's just something we have to do every couple of years. And having sat in your chairs, we'll try to make it a little bit fun. Hopefully you'll come away today with something more than you came with. But today we're going to go through several different courses. The first one's going to be for 2 hours. We'll take breaks, so don't worry, you're not going to have to sit here for 2 hours straight. But we're going to talk about the anatomy of construction defects. And a little housekeeping. I know a lot of you, well, we all have these wonderful things called cell phones. And we used to say they were attached to our hip because a lot of us used to wear them on our hip. Now we put them in our pockets. Can't find which pocket we put it in. But if you'll put this on mute or vibrate mode, if you need to take a phone call, just slip out and take it and then come back in as quick as you can. I understand, and that won't offend me. I understand that sometimes you've got a call you've got to take. And so you don't have to explain. But you do need to come back to get credit. So I'll just leave it at that. And then the facilities, if you haven't been here before, just out the door to your right all the way to the end of the hall. And we'll take some breaks, as I mentioned, and try to move through so you can make some calls, get a stretch. And usually we do those breaks 5 to 10 minutes, just depends on where we're at and how you're feeling. So, and then if you have questions as we're talking, or something that an experience you've had, or something that's pertinent to what I'm talking about, raise your hand. I'd love to have you include that in our presentation today. It makes it a lot more interesting if you do participate. If you just sit there like you are right now, it's going to be a long 6 hours. How many of you are here for the full 6? Most of you. Okay. Well, whether it's fun or not, that's up to you. So I'm going to ask this question to begin with. What constitutes a defect in construction? Your understanding. No wrong answers, by the way. What's a defect? Volunteers? You know, I had you put your name on a card. There's pins in front of you. If you haven't written your name or your nickname, please do so. Fred, I'm going to pick on you first just because you were smiling at me. What's a defect?
Something wrong with your job.
Okay. Have you ever, any of you, had something go wrong with your job? Never? Some of you are shaking your head like, not me. So I'll preface what I'm going to say next with a story. I went to work for a client, a builder, like many of you, and they were having some problems. And so he said, I'd like you to do some training. We want to talk about construction defects, how to avoid them, which is what we're going to talk about today. And so what I did was I said, all right, I'm going to come early before the presentation. In fact, I'm going to come the day before. And I'm going to spend some time. So give me addresses and names of superintendents and where these jobs are. And I'm going to go out and take pictures from your job sites. And then I'm going to put them into my presentation that night. So the next day, we're talking about your jobs specifically. He loved the idea, so we did it. And the next day, as I was teaching this group, this company, all their production personnel, they were like, that's not my job. We don't do it that way. And fortunately, I knew the names of a lot of the people, and I'd seen them on the jobs. And I was able to say, well, Mike, that is one of your jobs, because I took the picture yesterday. It was very interesting. I got the idea from a friend of mine who does what I do. He had a similar situation, and when he was introduced one time at a large builder, national builder, the VP of construction basically said, listen to what he says, because at 1 o'clock you're going to have a test. And if you fail the test, you're fired. And everyone kind of wet their pants. But they went through, and one of the guys just kept saying, you know, it would be like you saying, Logan, that's not my job. I know how to do it better than that. And it was your job. And he even had a picture of you at the job. So we all occasionally run into that problem of a defect. If we didn't, I wouldn't be employed right now. My company, Build Tech Solutions, would not be doing what I'm doing. And the reality is, when the downturn hit, and most of us survived that downturn, or you wouldn't be here today getting your education so you could relicense. That was a tough time for all of us. Look around the room. and look who's in this group, and recognize that when we started to come back, 53% of the people that were in this room today didn't come back to the industry. So we lost a lot of knowledge, what I call deep knowledge. We lost a lot of skilled people. Would you agree with that? The skill out there is very difficult to find and to keep. And that's a problem our industry has to grapple with and figure out, because we haven't figured it out. And we are really, really still struggling in that arena. That's a subject for a different day, but it's the reason we have so many defects. So we're going to have some fun. I'm going to show you a picture. And this is a site that I go to almost every year to document. But I'm going to look at that. And that was my wife's comment as we were driving up the Coast Highway in California 6 or 7 years ago. And she saw this and she said, "Whoa!" And you know, with a guy like me in the business, I'm always taking pictures of construction. So she's my helper. And I stopped and I took photos, and then I had to go to the beach and walk around the backside and look up. And I've done that every year now for a long time. If you're looking down the photo, see the gray house way down at the end with the roof like that? I was there a few months ago. That's the only house left. I haven't uploaded the new photos yet. I thought I ought to do a collage of each year how it's changed. What happened here? Ground gave out. Okay, I'd agree with that. Why? Erosion. Okay, what else? How many builders are in the group that build homes? How many trades? Okay, Gary, what do you do?
Electrical and plumbing.
Electrical and plumbing. Shane?
Painting.
Painting, okay. So erosion. Other areas? Other things? Earthquake? Poor engineering. Okay. What else? Gravity, yeah. Actually, yeah, duh. And this is on the northern coast of California. It's north of San Francisco. It's a little town called Bodega Bay, if you've ever been there. It's just north of Bodega Bay. Pretty vicious winter storms that come in, and a very rocky area. And so you've got that as well. You know, we build homes and structures and do everything inside of them. And the idea is that they stay dry, right? And so when you have storms that are beating on that house all the time, what's our worst link to those storms on a house? The outside structure, right? The roof, the cladding. And if it's not done right, we're going to have problems. It's not if we'll have a problem, it's when will the problem actually be visible. So in reality, what happened to this house, or houses I should say, was I kept thinking, man, the storms are really beating on it. It had to be an engineering issue. You know, that's my brain. I'm going, engineers really screwed up on the footings, the pilings, the caissons for these houses. And the ocean is just eroding that and causing them to cave in and fall in. Okay, so there's another rule. If your phones go off, you have to get up on your chair and dance to the music. Anyway, the bottom line is that's what I thought initially. And then I went back the second time, and I realized that it had to be more than that. Because I walked down clear past that gray house on the end and came back through those rocks onto the beach at low tide so I could get back to these houses and look. And the ones on this far end, low tide was never low enough, but I could get close with a telephoto lens. And I said, man, there's something going on. I started seeing water seeps along that face of that cliff. So then I started examining up on top, and there's a small mountain range. It's called the Coastal Range, and it's just right, you can't see it here, just to the left of the photo and a little bit this way. And water from that comes down, like water does, and goes to the ocean. And there's 3 or 4 major, what I would call seeps of water that's moving, and 3 of them come out underneath these houses. So one, you've got the winter storms that are crashing all the time against, and the rains and the constant battle of the waves, number one. And yet they have concrete caissons. There's more concrete in this place than I've ever seen in my life. And so it had to be more than that. And as I examined it and looked at it and then followed it up for a couple of years, I realized that what had happened was the engineers, the designers, the builders of these houses, I learned that all of them were built by different builders. No one took into fact that they had to deal with the water somehow. The water had to get from the other side of these houses to the ocean. Well, where did it go? Under the houses, through the foundation systems, and there were various types of foundation systems that were used, but every one of them has failed. In fact, it's caused so much damage. The road, Highway 1, is just to the left of these houses. They're in the process right now this year of moving Highway 1 to the east, an additional 100 to 150 yards. And they're putting 50, 60-foot concrete caissons that are 8 foot around down into the ground to support the roadway. And it's all because of water. I want you to remember that. What happened here? Did anything happen here?
Settling.
Settling. Okay? Other thoughts?
Didn't brace it up.
Didn't brace what up? Okay, no support to the dirt in the porch? Okay. So the builder, obviously, what do we do as builders? We try to get the job done, right? Do we get all of our money till the job's done? No. So we're always kind of in a hurry usually. What this builder did was they dug out. It's a bit of a hillside. They put the footing foundation in. They backfill it, of course, but when they get ready to do the concrete, and you can see this walkway is the same elevation as the garage, they had to put fill back in. They didn't compact it. They didn't retain it. And so the driveway, everything just started to fall apart. And furthermore, the downspouts, and you can't see it real well, but the downspout at this big, huge entry column goes into a little bit of dirt planter between the garage door and this walkway. Where's the water going to go? Hasn't been compacted. There's no accommodations for drainage. So water management is a very big deal in our industry. It's one of the things that's so big, and yet very few people pay attention to it. And most people don't even understand the code because the code addresses it, and we're going to talk about that later too. What happened here? This is my favorite photo, by the way. And I'll move once in a while. I get out of the camera so you guys can see the photos. Take a really good look.
Hard to sit and wipe.
Yeah, yeah. How tall are you?
6'2".
Okay, so Logan's 6'2". You got pretty good reach, right? I can guarantee you can't catch the paper here. So I took my wife to lunch. And I went back and dropped her off at her office, and it just was in the final stages of a remodel uptown. And I needed to use the facilities before I went off to one of my meetings. So I went into the bathroom. And this is what I found. And I went, oh, that's kind of cool. What the heck were they thinking? And so then, of course, being who I am, I had to go and walk around the entire building to check out all the bathrooms. You notice anything different between those two toilets? Toilet seat. And I'm going, my dad was a plumbing contractor, and I grew up as a son of a plumber, and why are they using different toilet seats? And so I was checking out the whole building, and I found the plumber. Gary, you're a plumber. I'll pick on you for a minute. And I said to Gary, Gary, do you mind explaining to me what's going on? And he said, I have to have it done today. And that's what the supply house sent me. And so I'm putting them in. Now, the question I'm going to ask you, because you're all very smart, you're all experts, is this a defect? A couple of you are shaking your head.
Absolutely. It's not acceptable.
Jaren, why is it a defect?
Because it doesn't serve the purpose.
Okay.
Toilet paper doesn't need to be over there. It needs to be next to the toilet.
Well, and if you're looking at that, would that meet code? No. Not even close. It's a handicapped stall. In fact, it's bigger than a handicapped stall needs to be. But heaven forbid a handicapped person tried to use this, because I'm not handicapped and I couldn't get the toilet paper. It's kind of like, oh, do you stand up first and get it, or what do you do? I mean, it was one of those kinds of questions. And so would it be considered a defect? And the answer is this. when I go to court to represent you with your attorney or your client, heaven forbid that they've hired me before you've hired me, this is the question that has to be answered. Is the thing we're looking at, that defect, does it impair the worth or utility? So did those toilet seats work? Yeah, they did. You could sit on them and they functioned. But if I was going to buy the building, would I want the toilet seats all changed out to be the same? And the answer is yes. So those were defective. As to the handicap stall, could a handicapped person use that facility? And the answer is no. Therefore, it's a defect. So you'd be responsible. So if you were the general contractor on this job, and I represented the owner as an example, you'd be redoing all that work at your cost. Absolutely. No questions asked. And so when we look at defects, that's what we have to think about. So how long are all of you, trade contractors and builders, responsible for this kind of baloney? How long are you on the hook?
7 years.
7 years, he says. Interesting number. You want to have a different number?
I'd say pretty much forever if they sue you.
Are you related to an attorney?
Huh?
Are you related to an attorney, Fred?
No, I'm
Just an old guy. You know, in the old days, there wasn't near as much suing going on as there is today. That's for darn sure, because I'm old enough to have been around the block, and I tell you what, I just, 2 weeks ago, and I can't share with you the details, I wish I could, but I just got done representing a builder who happens to be a friend, and his attorney and I have known each other forever, and he's known the attorney forever, and we are anxiously awaiting the judge's decision in a matter where we believe that he didn't do anything wrong. Less than 6 months ago, I won an arbitration where there was a single issue with a multi-million-dollar house, a single issue. And it came down to communication. That's it. Nothing was defective, but the owner believed that it was defective. And we won that case. It cost the builder tens of thousands of dollars to win that case. And yet he did nothing wrong. Not a single thing wrong. So it's expensive. I guess that's my point. But you want to avoid that. So back to the time frame. We have a 7. Have a 7 going once? Going twice? No one wants to dispute 7 years. You're all just going to... Fred said forever, so we've got forever over here and we've got 7 years. Bob?
There is the fact of the discovery of when the defect becomes discovered.
Oh, you want to expand on that just a little bit?
Well, that statute of limitations expands and starts when the person discovers the defect.
Okay. So now, for those of you that aren't aware of that, technically that's called a latent defect. So it's a defect that no one was aware of, and all of a sudden it's discovered. And they've got a time period of discovery then to share that with the rest of the world, including you. In Utah, it's 6 years, so you're close, plus another 2, so actually 8. And I hate to admit it, but Fred's right. Someone can sue you at any time, regardless of the statute. Now, whether they'll be able to take it through the courts, whether a judge would throw it out, whether you have a really good attorney that would understand how to do that, but you can literally be sued any time, any place for as long as they want to sue you. And you have to defend yourself. And defending yourself is expensive. So the best way to do it, I was at a project yesterday, and as I was leaving the job site trailer, there's a little sign. I was going to try to load it today, and I didn't, but it's a little sign on the door. So every trade that comes in and talks with the project manager and the superintendents and then walks back out sees this little sign, because you have to put your hand on the doorknob and you're looking right at it, and it says, "Do it right the first time." If you learn nothing else from me today, take that home as a takeaway. Do it right the first time, because then you can avoid so much of this other stuff that goes on. And that's my job today, is to share with you something that's beneficial. I hope I never have to work for any one of you. That would be my wish. Because trust me, I got plenty of work, and you don't want to be paying me. So, any of you read the book Good to Great by Jim Collins? A couple of you? What did you think of it? Okay. I'm going to give my own personal synopsis. It's one of those books you could read 2 or 3 times and you'd still get something new. Jim Collins is a researcher. And he and his group have done several books, but I particularly like this saying in his book. What they did was they looked at companies that we'd all recognize the names like Coca-Cola and, you know, on and on, big companies that became good and then became great. And then he later talks about some of those that fell out of grace and why. But specifically, the good to great was what takes a company from being a good building company, a good HVAC company, from being a good company to great. And what it really comes down to is doing the simple things, the basic stuff. Any of you football fans? Okay, what was Vince Lombardi's favorite saying and favorite thing that he did? Now that dates all of us because he's you know, kind of a long time ago. But what was he known for as a coach? Come on. No one can remember? He said that if you do the basics perfectly, that you can be a championship team. And while he was the coach, they were a championship team. And they weren't fancy. They just did the blocking. And he expected you to block and tackle every single play. And the same is true as construction. If we do the basics really well, and that's what Jim Collins found, essentially, is that the companies that really do the basic stuff really well, it's not the great idea or the wonderful product, although that helps, it's doing the basics. It's taking care of your customers 100% of the time, not 50% of the time, 100% of the time. And you can become great. And the way you stay great is then you continue to come up with new products and new ideas. But you've got to be doing those basics. So I love that saying because it's really just that simple. But because it's so simple, I believe it's also, like Jim says, very, very difficult to do on a consistent basis. How many of you do every single thing that you know you should be doing in your business? Every single day. Raise your hand. You noticed I didn't raise my hand either? Because we know more than what we apply and what we do. That's just our nature. We're busy. We focus on the fire that's the biggest and the hottest. And that's what we have to do. But we also have to learn that we've got to do everything really, really well. Codes. You can't talk about defects without talking about codes. How many of you love the building codes? Honestly, raise your hand. Okay, I've got a good class. This is great. How many of you really struggle with the codes? Okay. I would tell you a story about the plumbing code and how it changed, but I'm not going to go down that road. Just suffice it to say that the reason we went from the old flushing toilets to the 1.6 and now the 1.2 had nothing to do with efficiency. Those of you that are old enough to know that when they first came out with the 1.6 flushers, it took you 2 or 3 flushes to get number 2 down. Because the TEF method that they used to determine that changed, and the plumbing industry did it on purpose so they could sell all new toilets to everybody. And the reality is it had nothing to do with energy efficiency or water conservation, nothing. It just had to do with marketing. And they were able to get that in. Now the story's a little different, but boy, fire sprinklers. How many of you love the fire sprinkler codes? Aren't you grateful we're in a state that said we're not going to do that in every single structure? Because if you read the code, as it reads, it says every habitable building. Doesn't mean a certain size or so far away from a fire department or a fire hydrant that has, 850 PSI or more. Every structure that someone inhabits has to have fire sprinklers. That's expensive. The state of Utah said, no, we're not going to require that. We'll require them here and in this situation and in this situation because it makes sense. Who lobbied to have fire sprinklers in every single house? I don't need to say much more, do I? The bottom line is I happened to be in a code meeting and we were talking about that issue as it was being debated. Do we want sprinklers? Do we not? Or do we, that whole discussion was very intriguing. And what was interesting was one of the fire marshals, and he'll go unnamed, but he raised his hand and he stood up and he said, there is not a single case of someone dying in a fire, a residential fire, in America, where it had a working smoke detector. And I thought, that's a pretty bold statement. So I did the research. Guess what? He's right. People that have disarmed, pulled the batteries, not maintained them, on and on. Yeah, there's been fires where people have lost their life or been injured because they've removed the batteries or not replaced the batteries in smoke detectors. But where there's a working, functional smoke detector, not a single case documented of a person dying. That was telling to me. So we have this love-hate relationship. Frankly, we have to deal with it, so we might went the wrong way, sorry. So we have to deal with it, so we might as well learn how to deal with it. So, and why are we not clicking? We had this problem last time. There we go. So this is from the ICC codes. The vision is obviously, they're looking out for the safety and health and welfare. And they should. And that's about as far as they should go. But that's my opinion. But this is from the code book. This is their purpose and mission. And the reality is that they want to have uniform codes. Do you remember what happened prior to 1999? Any of you build outside of Utah prior to 1999? Any of you? So there was a large group of code sanctioning officials. There's BOCA, ICBO, which we were familiar, International Code Building Officials. That's what we built under. And some of the big builders that were building nationally were just pulling their hair out because they'd go to Utah and they'd have to build under this code, and they'd go to Georgia and they'd have to build under that code, and they'd go to Wyoming and they'd say, what code? And literally it was confusing. And so the National Home Builders Association and these code councils said, we got to change our ways. So they brought that all together, and in 2000 was the very first, what we call International Code Council series of codes. There's 15 code books like this. How many of you have read them all? Russell, do you know everything in there? I've been doing this for decades, and guess what? I have to tab them, and I still don't know all the answers. If you have trouble sleeping, I highly recommend spend the $100 and whatever dollars it is for the code book and buy it and put it by your bedside. You'll fall asleep quicker than reading the Bible. It will just knock you out cold. But there's some things about the code we need to understand. There's about 1,000 plus new products every year that come to market that have to meet code that aren't in the code book. Because we do the codes every 3 years, right? How many of you do stucco? Raise your hand if you do stucco at all on any of your structures. Nobody does stucco. Bob, you do stucco. Okay. Where do you find stucco in the code book?
You would not know.
You would not know. Your stucco guy should know, though, right? Yeah. You're hoping he does.
Yeah. So
if you go to the code book and you look up stucco, what does it tell me I can build? This is just one example, but it's a great one. 3-coat stucco. You know what 3-coat stucco is? Everyone familiar with the term?
3 applications.
So you have your wire mesh, your weather barrier, your wire mesh, and you put a scratch coat on. Then you come back and put a brown coat on. Then you come on and put your finish coat. That finish coat doesn't necessarily have color. So then you can come back and paint it like they do in Arizona, or you can use an acrylic color top coat. That's what's in the code book. Do we do stucco that way here in Utah? Not even close. We use what's called a Western one coat. So the way you're able to do that is because of the next slide. It's called an ES report. Evaluation Service is what ES stands for. And every single company that wants to do a product in our world that's not in the book, and there's very little that's in the book, has to meet a set of standards. And they have to determine that by testing that this product's going to work. And then the ES report, and it could be anywhere from 1 to 30 pages, but the bulk of them are 2 or 3 pages. They get updated every couple of years. They have the same number, usually. And I say usually because sometimes they update the number and I don't know why. But it tells you, and this is hairstone. We all know hairstone from Ogden. It's faux stone. And the bottom line is it tells you how to install it, under what conditions it can be installed in order to be codifiable. I remember in Utah in the early 90s when we were having so much problem with stucco because everyone was just kind of doing their own little thing, and we had a lot of water intrusion, a lot of damage. And what happened was the code officials got together and said, holy crap, what's going on? A bunch of us here at the Home Builders Association met with them and said, we need to have a standard. We started looking at these because we didn't have this. This happened after 2000. So we didn't have the ES reports. And what we realized was that every manufacturer had some very specific nuances as to how to install their product. And if we didn't meet that product, and there was a problem, and your stucco fell off, Bob, and I got called in, I would go to the manufacturer specifications and say, did you install it this way? Nope. Guess what? You're on the hook. Replace all that stucco, tear it off and redo it. Expensive proposition. So we go to ES reports. And so when I get called in on a project, the first thing I do is say, okay, what's the manufacturer? I look up the manufacturer specifications, the ES reports, and that's what we use. And you better be following them. So if and I'll pick on you again, Bob, you hire the stucco out. Make darn well sure your stucco contractor is following the ES report for every product, whether it's Drive It or Synergy, doesn't matter. Stowe, I'm working on a project down in Moab that's Stowe product. Great company. The guys that put it on didn't have a clue how to install it. And they just did it, and their answer to me was, well, we've just done it the way we've always done it. But Stowe says you have to do this first, this second, this third, and that fourth. And they flip number 2 and 3 backwards because that's the way they'd always done it. Guess who's replacing the stucco? Pretty expensive fix. So, construction defects. We're going to go through because there's some key drivers and there's some types of construction defects, and I want you to understand the difference. So the key drivers, and this is based on my experience over the last decade and a half. It changes every year a little bit. Interesting, they never go off the list. They just kind of change the order of which seems to be the most prevalent. But the number one that I'm seeing right now currently, and has been for the last 3 years, is the settlement of underlying soils. I was on a project down in Cedar City. It had both expansive soils and collapsible soils on the same site. Yeah, John. Did you hear that comment? That was all I needed to hear. Imagine what happened when they didn't get water 10 feet away from the house structure per code. And the water came, and the water went down around the footings and foundations. Well, you've got soils that when they get wet expand, and then you've got soils that when they get wet collapse. What happened to that house? Basically, I'll show you some pictures in a little bit. It's pretty nasty. Water intrusion, another really big one. Water intrusion happens usually at flashings and at barriers. With the biggest area I see, because we're using a lot of multiple cladding products, so we'll use like a fiber cement siding, we'll use a faux stone or a brick, and maybe some stucco as an accent. And where those come together, a lot of you, and you don't have to raise your hand, but you'll have, you know, your brick guy do the weather barrier where he's going to do the brick, and you'll have your siding guy do the barrier where he's going to do his, because you really don't want to take the time to figure out which barrier is going to be the best for all three and have one person install it. And so there's gaps and overlaps that aren't made at those joints, and they're typically outside corners. And then all of a sudden there's, you know, all hell breaks loose and things start falling apart. And I show up and I put my finger at a corner between brick and hardy board, and I can put my finger right in and scratch the OSB. And I'm going, where's the weather barrier? And then they scratch their head and say, well, how come the house is failing? And how come I'm being sued for, you know, $1.5 million? Anyway, so water intrusion's a very big deal. Improper stucco system. What we find is that a stucco guy has been doing stucco for years, and I don't mean anybody stucco contractors here? Oh, good, I can pick on you. What happens is you just have done it for so long that someone picks a Synergy color, you just go do Synergy. Or you change you've been using diamond as your base coat, and now you've changed it to something else because the architect specified something different. And you just go buy it. No one requires you to take a class. You just go buy it at the supplier and you just mix it up and away you go. And what you don't realize is that this new product, they specify, as they all do by the way, that you actually have to mist the system after you put it on and let it cure. Some are 24 hours, some are 48, some are 7 days that you have to keep it damp while it's curing. Or you'll have major cracks and problems. Is stucco waterproof? No, it's not. And so then when your wall fails and you're scratching your head saying, what happened to this wall? We go back and do the research and we're going, well, talk to me about the installation. What was the temperature? Well, I don't know what the temperature was that day. What day did you install it? So we kind of roughly figure out what days you installed it. And then I go to a site called NOAA. Do you know what NOAA is?
National Weather.
National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. I can find a city close enough to everywhere where you build, and I can go back years, and I can tell you exactly what the average temperature was throughout the day. And that's what we use. And then we find out, well, that crap, you were putting the stucco on it, it was 95 degrees outside. You didn't wet the walls down. You didn't cure the stucco. You just, 3 days later, you came back and put the finish coat on. And now you're wondering why it's cracking and failing. And so those are the kinds of documentation that will be used against you should you screw up. I'm here to teach you not to screw up. The next is, again, cracking in foundations. We have cracking in foundations, concrete and drywall, typically because of, and back to number one, settlement of soils. Concrete just doesn't, concrete has surface cracking and capillary cracking, but when concrete fails, regardless of where it is, and when drywall starts to fail, as a rule of thumb, it's directly related to some kind of settlement. And so you can have more than one reason or one cause, but that's typically what's happening. Now, there's 4 types of construction defects you need to be aware of. Number 1 is construction document defects. What would I mean by construction documents? What would make up construction documents?
Plans and specs.
Plans and specs. Samson, thank you. Plans and specs, okay. What else?
Contract.
Contract. Awesome. What else?
Value engineering.
Okay. Absolutely. So literally anything that goes together as part of what we're bidding, what we're building, everything from the plan, the site plan, the construction plans, the details on those plans. How many of you open up a set of plans and you realize that the details had nothing to do with the house you're building, but it's just boilerplate detail? I love the look. We've all seen it. It's like, okay, throw page 5 in, throw page 6 in. Has nothing to do. So one of these cases I just mentioned earlier, it had a detail on a page that you had to use this certain type of roofing materials and ... Had nothing to do with the building that was being built. Didn't even meet the code for what needed to be done. And yet their side was saying, but that's what it says on the plans. Well, technically we're held to what's on the plans. So we had to work really hard to help the judge understand that while that's true, we're supposed to build it per plan. When the guy who did the plan screwed up and just threw boilerplate in there, which this is, are you liable for that? That's the one we're waiting to hear whether the judge liked us and liked our argument. But the reality is, technically, in most cases, you have to build it per plan. So I advise you to go through and look at the plans. I learned that the hard way about 30 years ago, and so I started working with people I trusted, and I said, no boilerplate. If there's a detail that needs to be built, put it on the detail pages. The structural guy is going to add the ones he wants. I don't want anything on that plan that doesn't absolutely need to be done per that detail on this house. And they said, why? I said, because I don't want to get screwed if something happens. I'm only going to build it per your plan. Check your plans. I've yet to find a plan ever. I did this at a conference, and I asked a few builders to bring plans in. Right in the middle of the class, we opened them up. And I said, did you build this detail? No. Why? Because it didn't need to be done. But it's on the plan. Wasn't a single set of plans in that room that hadn't been reviewed, that didn't have a bunch of boilerplate. Now, is that your responsibility? Shouldn't be. I mean, let's be honest. It should be the designer, the architect. That's their job. But guess who gets the biggest share of the hurt if you screw up? You guys. The general contractor does. So my advice is take a little time, slow down, open up those plans, take a red pen or a highlighter, whatever you want, and if that detail, you're smart guys, if that detail shouldn't be there, circle that baby, put a line through it, take it back to the architect and say, fix this, please. Shane.
So on the basis of maybe a customer or a builder needs something done, like I do a lot of striping and stuff.
Okay.
So they're taking a lot of the chlorinated rubbers and the alkyd paints out of the equation now because of the environment and stuff.
Right.
So they're like, we just got to get this done, and it fails because you're doing waterborne or something.
Yeah.
Or what if you're I'm painting or something, they want something painted on the outside and it fails because of weather, it's gotta be done. Is there anything that I can do to protect myself, saying, hey, I'm painting your stucco, or I'm painting your parking lot, and I'm not gonna guarantee it. You even said you're okay with it, you'll just paint it in the spring again, or whatever.
Right.
Is there anything I could do to help protect myself in a situation where they have to get that permit done? If I don't get out and strike the parking lot like that, that's what I'm gonna do, but it's gonna fail.
There is. And Shane's a painter, remember, correct?
Yep.
There is, and it's a great question because it hits us all from time to time. A deadline happens, we're trying to get something finished. If you're asked to do something, if you're a builder and a homeowner or client asks you to do something and you know there's an issue, if you're a trade and a builder asks you to do something, there's an issue, document it in writing and require a signature and a date.
That's it?
Yep. Simple.
Just a paragraph, blah, blah, blah.
I've informed you that the weather will not permit me to do this, or it will meet the specifications on the product.
Okay.
You will probably have to redo this,
Right.
and there is no warranty. So your contract that says you have a warranty
Void.
is now void.
Okay.
Absolutely. Because here's the magic.
I have done that. I was wondering.
Nope.
If it's gonna hold or-
It actually will. If you've got a contract that says one thing and then you have it's like a change order,
Yeah,
but then you say to Logan, you know,
I don't recommend.
I can't, I'm telling you no, don't
Yeah.
do this. If you do, you're going to have to repaint it, but I have to remove my warranty. Here's the piece of paper. It can be a simple paragraph, it can be handwritten. I recommend you don't. I'd put it on some sort of a Word doc.
Right.
But get a signature,
Okay.
and you sign it as well, and you date it.
And guys like you can't come behind me and, hey, on this and this day.
Don't you love the questions you get when you're teaching? I mean, the bottom line is if I'm...
That guy isn't here anymore, Jenny.
So, okay, that brings up another question. Who should sign it?
Yeah, the owner or whatever.
You as the owner of the company should sign it,
Okay.
and the builder or the homeowner should sign it.
Okay.
Don't have the foreman, because if that foreman's gone,
Right.
they'll say, well, I didn't see that document. I didn't authorize that.
Right.
Has to be what we call an authorized signature.
Okay.
So owner of the company, a vice president of the company, someone who has, if you have okay, let me back up. There's a company here in town that builds homes. Their president can't make a decision. He can't authorize any money to be spent to be fixed. He has a title and that's it. He's nothing more than a glorified project manager. In fact, he's not even a glorified project manager. Because most of our superintendents we have where they can spend up to so much money. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that whoever signs it has the authority to back up that signature. And don't let the title be the one that, if it's the owner of the company, you're safe. But if it's just a title like a president or whatever, I mean, am I really the president of Build Tech Solutions? Well, you can find that out. Make sure that whoever is signing that document. Because if you do, and I'm on the other side, and that document came to light, I would go to my client and I would say, Logan, I know you don't think you really had that conversation, but your signature's on this piece of paper. We're going to have to just say, okay, we bite that one. That one, we'll fight this other stuff, but that one we're toast on. So that's all you need to do. But make sure whoever signs it has the authority to sign it. And you're good. You're golden. It's the best. If it's not written and if it's not signed, it didn't exist. Now, we look at emails and we look at verbal contracts in Utah. But I'm going to tell you, if you're sitting in front of a judge or especially a jury, verbal agreements, while by law are binding, they don't carry the weight that a written document does.
Hard to prove.
Exactly. So he said, and if you get into a true he said, she said, John, thanks for bringing that up. It's tough to prove. And that's what you're trying to do. So great question. Thank you for throwing that out. Okay, design defects.
Quick question on the
Sure.
construction documents with the defect.
Uh-huh.
Always in the general notes on those things, it's contractor shall verify, blah, 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 use this tech,
Yeah.
And the designers seem to try to pull themselves off the liability of that design.
That's exactly what they're doing. And they
You're
were,
bound to that because you just signed the contract saying you're going to build it for the specs. And,
yeah.
Right? So you just agreed to.
You just agreed to all that crap.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what you want to do before you sign a contract is read that plan and redline anything that you just aren't going to accept. Now, Now we're getting into business 101. Do you not take a job because of something you're afraid of? You know, you have to make that decision as a business owner.
Right now, yeah.
But I'm going to tell you in today's world, 10 years ago my answer would have been slightly different. But in today's world, do you really want to take on a job where you're going to end up paying them? Is that really what you're, are you in business to do that? I don't think so. So don't agree to things you're not willing to do. And the general classification, that one page that has all that crap, if you really read through it closely, you'll find if the designer is as old as I am, he's going to have materials in there that you don't even use anymore. And what happens if there's a problem and I come in and I'm looking at that document? I have to go by the document. Well, you were supposed to use this. Well, what's this? Well, all the ply materials are going to be plywood, not OSB. Do we use a lot of plywood in Utah? No. Guess what happens if you built it with OSB? You're tearing the thing down because the plans said plywood. So make sure that it's accurate to how we build today in the market and for the specific project that you're doing.
He should revise what's bugging him if he sees something in.
Redline it, change it, give it back to the architect and the owner and say, you know what, this needs to be changed, and then I'll sign the contract. Glad to accommodate, but we need to make it, and the wordage I use is, it needs to be accurate to what we do in the industry and what is normal and customary, and it needs to reflect that. And most architects will push back on it. And the best fun you can ever have is to be in front of an architect and an owner and to say, well, you're using a document that's probably 30 years old, and you're charging this client, and it needs to be today specific. Oh, client loves you. Architect, well, you'll never work for them again, but it's fun.
A couple of years ago, we're an interior contractor, so we do
Okay.
finish work, cabinets.
Uh-huh.
Like that. I had a commercial project with 9 pages of RFI.
Oh!
On the initial plans that were screwed up. And I just sent it back to him and says, we can't even bid this. It doesn't
Yeah.
correct all this.
Yeah,
And you're right, I've never worked for that architect. But the whole project got redesigned.
exactly.
It was so bad.
Yeah,
And by
Yeah.
the time it hit everybody else, flooring and everything, they all came back and said, we don't have any idea where he pulled that stuff out of his butt.
yeah, and what's sad is he doesn't remember either. Did you have another comment, Steve?
Yeah, there was talking about taking a contractor or not. We did a commercial project and the company was from Holland, I think, but they had a representative here to watch it and to sign the contracts and accept the contracts. And we did the first phase and it was a, I don't know, $5 million job, but it had a lot of import and it was in the structure.
Right.
It was collapsing the soil, or collapsing the soil.
Right.
Plastic. And so we finished the project and it was really expensive for them to, import all that material. Well, when it came to do the next phase, the guy that was here representing them wanted to cut the import out from under the footings.
Oh.
It wasn't for, they could get compaction with the native material.
Right,
It was for load material.
right, yeah,
And so we missed out on that second phase because we wouldn't
right,
deviate from the soils report. And so you kind of have to make that choice. And when you're dealing with that, it's pretty frustrating because somebody was willing to come in and do that type of work. Whether it ever fails or not will only depend upon water or something
Sure.
penetrating it.
Sure.
So you may just lose it. You may be happy you did, if it fails. It's just a tough thing in the industry. People are making decisions that don't that representative, he could be gone tomorrow.
He could. He could.
He has no risk, and yet he's
Yeah.
pushing that, so it's a little rough environment.
It's a tough road to hoe, and what happens is our industry, like all others, there's always going to be someone that's going to undercut and do it for less. There's always someone that's going to see that specification and say, blow it, I'm just not going to do it, because they'll take that risk. But my question to you in return is, can you afford to take that risk? And the reality is, from my experience and just my eyes, no, you can't. And while sometimes you'll make a decision to lower your normal price to get a job, maybe because you've got 5 guys and it's a little slow. We're not experiencing that right now, but let's just say it's a little slow. And you really want to have some cash flow. you don't want to have to pull from some of that savings, and you really want to buy that new piece of equipment, you make a calculated business decision to lower your price for a job or two. That's a business decision, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if that's your model, that you're always going to come in at low price, you're not going to survive. And you'll be under a different name, and your life will be miserable, and you won't have a great reputation. It's just the way it is. But what we have to do is we have to hold everyone else. I need to hold you accountable. You need to hold each other accountable. That's what makes the industry better. You know how a tide lifts all boats? You don't have to worry about your competition. If you're doing it right, and you're doing it right with the right people, yeah, you won't dirt work for that architect ever again. You are so right. It will never happen. But do you want to? Not really. And so what you do is you go find some architects and designers that are good to work with and who understand your dilemma and who want to partner and say, absolutely. You know, we want a builder that's, I mean, I can tell you 3 names of architects right now that would love to work with builders like that because it's a partnership. And if we can improve what we're doing and we're charging our client for that and you're charging, hey, we're all in, let's do this and let's protect ourselves, because if the client has money and they come after both of us, we're toast. Anyway, great questions, and it's true. We live in that kind of an element of that kind of society today. So construction defects documents, that has everything to do. It's the primary contract with the buyer or the end user, the owner. It also is your trade contract. And so we call those secondary contracts. Scopes of work. How many of you use scopes of work? Actually, everyone that uses scopes of work, be honest, raise your hand. Less than half of you. Now, in the commercial world, it's almost exclusively, if I was teaching this class to a bunch of commercial builders, it would be like 99%. Residential's catching up, but we're not near that 90 percentile that we need to be. And, pardon?
I bet they're there. A lot of people don't even know they're there.
Well, they're there, but a lot of builders I know don't use them. They have them. I know other builders that don't even have scopes of work and don't even know how to use them. One of the biggest things that scopes of work help us to do is really detail out who's doing what and what that overlap is. I can't tell you how many times when we're not talking lean building today, but if we were, this would be part of the discussion, because what happens is Logan's doing X for me, Russell's doing Y, their scopes of work clearly say what they're doing, but you bid to do part of his work and you bid to do part of his, and I didn't take the time to go through your bids really detailed, and I'm paying you both to do the same thing and only one of you is doing it. And hopefully it's you, because then guess what? You don't have to do it, and you got paid for it. That's only one element of scopes, but it's a big one. It also establishes protocol on a job site. I had some workers, and they brought their microwave, and they would heat up their lunch, and they set it on the porch cap, and the stuff that they were heating was very greasy and nasty. And I told them, no, it's in your scope. You don't eat on site. You don't cook on site. So I made them take the microwave out to their trailer. And of course, I'm the bad guy. Came back the next day, they were in the house using the brand new microwave in the house. My homeowner happened to walk in. Guess who bought a brand new microwave for the house? Me. Because she said, I'm not going to use that. I've replaced toilets. I've replaced microwaves, ovens. Scopes of work detail that and detail the penalties and set the standard. Can you have a dog on site? Do you allow dogs on site? Well, if your homeowner loves dogs, probably not a bad idea. But if your homeowner doesn't like dogs, and they show up on a job site and your framer's dog's crapping on their dirt, the chances of you not being as professional as your client thinks you should be is pretty good. So design defects are defects that happen with the design. Whoever drew it, whoever came up with the concept, whoever put that to paper, whether it was a building designer, an architect, and there's good ones in both industries. There's bad ones in both industries, just like there is in ours. But one of the issues we see in Utah a lot is we build some really good-looking houses, don't we? Would you agree? And when you get those really interesting steep pitch roofs that are all cut up, they're really good-looking from the street, aren't they? But you know what? After about 2-3 years, we start having water problems with them. Because we have snow and we have thaw and freeze. And no matter, unless you've got a really, really, really good roofer, I can guarantee you're going to have a problem. I can guarantee you water will get in, even though you think you've done it right. And so design defect comes into play. Now, design defect is not as prevalent as construction document defects, but they do happen. And so that's why I put it up there. It's important if you're looking at a set of plans and you see something that just doesn't make sense, and we're going to show you a picture a little bit later, but if it just doesn't make sense, say something. That new adage of see something, say something, it applies in the construction world really well because we need to say more about what's not going to work. Material defects, we don't see that as often, but material defects would be, say you order windows and they come scratched from the factory, or there's a stress crack, or your mason is throwing sand out onto the dirt and then he's mixing up mortar for the brickwork and he's got dirt that's going into the mortar. That's when we talk about material defects. Your stucco guy, is not mixing the materials properly on site. So that's materials that come to the job and there's a defect either causing that happens on the job site or it comes from the factory that way. We don't have a lot of material defects where products fail, but when they fail miserably. LP siding, remember that about 4 or 5 years ago? Major, major issues. They were trying to compete with Hardie. They came out with some new products. They kind of sped the testing up a little bit. We later found out. And they were failing. Cost them over $1 billion.
Smartboard.
Yeah, when it first came out and had problems. Now they've fixed it, and they've kind of got most of the bad PR, buried. But that happens occasionally. Not often, but it does happen occasionally. And you want to be using quality products because LP stood up and paid to fix a lot of houses. I've got a story about that, but we'll pass. We're getting close to break time. So those are the types. Oh, let me go back. Installation defects. This is the biggie. Second to construction documents, the installation defects is big. That's where you simply do it wrong or in the wrong order. Someone doesn't know what they're doing. Back to that skilled labor issue that we talked about at the beginning. It's just not done right. In the industry, we have a major problem. There's what we call fit and finish and level of finish. Anyone care to comment? What is fit and finish in the industry? You're builders. You should know this. This is not even 101. Fit and finish. Samson, I'm going to pick on you. You're smiling. You were looking over at this wall, and that's why I'm picking on you.
I'm looking at the door. They install the door, and the door doesn't exactly shut.
Okay.
It doesn't fit the opening.
Right.
That's a little bit of an issue or a problem.
That's a fit and finish issue, isn't it? Now, there are those in the industry that believe, incorrectly I'll add, that if you're building a starter home, which is now a townhome, versus a $10 million custom, that the level of fit and finish is different. I'm going to repeat that. That there's no difference between an entry home and a multi-million-dollar home in terms of fit and finish. You can have lower quality of fit and finish. That's false. And yet that's what our industry provides 90% of the time. I have a project I'm working on in Holiday, 11,000 square foot house. There's so much wrong with this house I can't begin to tell you. But we had some issues with trim. And the trim carpenter is very, very good. And he said, Mark, there's not a square corner in this house. He said it in front of the client. And bless his heart, he didn't mean for the fallout. But he was brought on after the fact to fix some major problems. The client turned to me and said, I want you to check every single corner in this house. 10-foot ceilings. So I checked top, middle, and bottom of every single corner of an 11,500 square foot house. What did I find? Not a single 90-degree corner.
Wow.
Not one.
Ouch.
And the drywaller gets all the crap. Any drywallers here? Drywaller got all the crap and the painter got all the crap for having a job that just didn't look great. That's fit and finish, gentlemen. And that has to stay at the same level regardless. That's square corners, things being plumb and true. Level of finish, now that's a whole different discussion. Because the difference of level of finish between an entry level We're one of 2 or 3 states that puts granite countertops in entry-level products. Do you realize that? If you go to California or to Washington, you do not get granite. You get laminate. The #1 countertop in America still is plastic laminate. Now, they've got some great products, and they look really good, and some of them look like real granite, but that's the norm for a lower quality. Granite, quartz, you know, you name the product, that's reserved for that upper end. That's a level of finish. We live in a very unique market. We're one of 12 markets nationally that smooth wall on drywall is the normal.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Thank you. Say that again.
That's crazy.
That's crazy. It's crazy, but it's what it is. It's what it is. And so it's very unique. Every market has its own little pimples and warts, and we have some very interesting ones here. But level of finish is completely different than fit and finish. And so when I get into court and the builders, everyone's been sloppy, I have a field day because the standard nationally is it's the same standard. What's really sad is I get into a lot of high-end homes. I have 1, 2, 3, 5 right now, and every one of them has the same problem. Framing is terrible. Drywall's even worse. Trim guy's trying to make it look good, and he's shaving parts that don't need to be shaved because it's just a nightmare. Bottom line is it shouldn't be happening. It is. So installation's a biggie, and we have a field day with that one. Shane.
I did a high-end home up, my little Cottonwood. The homeowner came in, the builder was in such a hurry, he probably didn't really care, but the framing was done so bad on these smooth walls that they were bowing.
Yeah.
So they're wondering, Shane, how come your paint looks like it's shadowing and stuff? And I'm like, because you got a bowed wall.
Yeah.
The framer or something didn't, everything's bowed in here and stuff, and they're like, you sure the paint's just not laying off? Shit, I bowed the wall. I'm like, I promise I laid that wall off. The goddamn drywall or the framer.
I did a custom home up in Draper a number of years ago, and we had it all, the upstairs was all completely framed, and we were doing our mechanicals, and we had dropped down into the basement, had a bunch more lumber brought out, another drop, and we were framing that all out, and we got going. Make a long story short, we were finishing the house. We were literally just doing finishing touches, and it looked beautiful. I mean, the people I had hired were good, and it was really, we were proud. It was a great job. We were really happy. And I got a phone call from the homeowner, and the heat had been turned on, and they said, it was over a course of about 4 or 5 days since I'd been to the job because we were right at the tail end of it, and he said, the walls in the basement are terrible. And I said, what do you mean? Because I'd walked the house, it looked great. And I could stand down the hallway and look, and it was just like a straight, I didn't have to even get my level out. It was perfect. I'm going, this is gorgeous. And so I go to the house, and I'm looking down that basement wall, and it was all over the place. And we're talking inches. I'm thinking, wow. So we started marking the wall. I called my framer. I called my drywall guy, and we're looking at it, scratching our head. So we pull off some drywall, and I'm going, holy crap. So I got my moisture meter out. And that framing was so wet, and it hadn't got exposed to the elements. So then I called my lumber supplier, and they came out and looked at it, and they scratched their head and said, holy crap. So then they called the manufacturer, and they sent a rep out, and he ran a water test on it, and he goes, you know, we had some lumber that came through that didn't get dried all the way. And they paid us to literally pull all the drywall and remove about 50% of that framing and reframe and redo the whole thing. And it was truly one of those things that happened. I didn't check the moisture of the material when it got delivered. My framer didn't check the moisture. He didn't even have a moisture meter. And so the question is, how frequently do we need to be checking the moisture of our framing material?
Did he feel like he was going to maybe be on the hook?
Yeah, he did. He had to eat some of it, but he got paid, you know. Everyone had to discount their pricing, and, you know, electricians came back, and they didn't do anything wrong. But fortunately, they discounted their pricing of on the stuff we did have to move and release. And so everyone chipped in. I chipped in as the builder. We all ate a little bit, and the manufacturer chipped in a lot. The lumber supplier chipped in a lot, and at least it didn't cost us a fortune. But yeah, those things happen. And yet, did anyone make a mistake? Yeah, the manufacturer did.
They use lumber to start with.
But we should we along that supply chain, should we have checked it? Absolutely. You know, I should have checked it. My framer should have checked it. But we didn't. Because how often do you have a problem? I can tell you what I do now. I don't build anymore, but I tell you what I was doing just before I quit building. I bought my framer a really nice moisture meter. And I said, check everything. Just check it. I'll pay you a little extra. Just check it. Let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back. So we've talked a lot about this, so this next part we're going to flip through pretty quick. But when we talk about construction documents, you know, we're talking about these things, the site plan, the drawings, the specs, and those are the things that you have to be cautious of. And we talked about the reasons, so I don't want to belabor that, but it's important. And they should include things like manufacturer specifications. If you're doing a product that you've never used before, take a few minutes and read the manufacturer specifications and make sure your trades know what's going on as well. Because that's going to bite you in the butt if you do it contrary to the manufacturer specifications. And as long as you do, and here's the big one, if you do something per the ES report and per the manufacturer specification and it fails, now the manufacturer, LP, DuPont, whoever it happens to be, and they've got the big bucks, they will step in. I guarantee you they will step in. And so now you've got some resources behind you. If you build it contrary to the manufacturer specifications, trust me, their expert like me and their attorney will figure that out real quick. And then they'll say, bye-bye, John. We're not going to help you, buddy. You are on your own because you didn't follow our guidelines. When I was early on in my career, certain companies would, if you were going to install or manufacture or do different things, they would require you to become certified. And we still have some of that in the industry, but not like we did, 30, 40 years ago. And the nice thing about it was when there was a failure, they would step up and take care of you. Today, you can literally buy from a distributor almost any product that can go into a home or a building. And rarely do you have to be certified. That's on purpose, because if you don't follow that specification, they are off the hook. The training program does cost them money, but at the end of the day, it also it increases their risk. And so, in my opinion, it's my opinion only, I think it's done purposely because you've got to, and they have the programs out there. There isn't a manufacturer out there that doesn't have some kind of a seminar, some type of a program to teach you how to install whatever it is they're teaching. But I guarantee you got to dig for it, and you got to ask. And then usually you have to go somewhere in order to receive that training. I highly recommend you spend that money to do it. Make a weekend out of it and have some fun. Just do something, but get that training, because they're not required by law to give it to you, but they are required to have it available. Shane?
The stucco application that you're referring to.
Yes.
They jump mix those 2 steps up, and
Yeah.
that's not right. Why are they doing that? They should have some kind of training with the product or read, the
Yeah.
manufacturer recommendations of application. Otherwise, they're doing it wrong.
Exactly. And what happens is we're more lucky than good. A lot of times we do that stuff wrong, but it doesn't show itself till after that statute of limitations. And if the statute of limitations is gone, unless it's clearly they can prove that you fraudulently did it, because back to Fred's comment, they can sue you forever. The bottom line is if they can prove, fraud's hard to prove, and it's really hard to prove in Utah. But if they can prove fraud, the time clock never stops. But it's tough to do. And most times you're off the hook because they've sold the house to somebody else and moved on, and you're doing your magic somewhere else, and your trade contractors no longer, they moved to California and then back to Utah, and whatever happens. And the bottom line is you're outside that statute of limitations. The new homeowner just says, crap, I got to pay someone to come in. How many of you do strictly remodeling? That's where your business comes from. You're going to come in and take care of, and they're going to say, well, we got to repair this wall because it's leaking. Let's just add on a new family room. And that kind of thing happens as a result. Okay. Primary contracts, trade contracts, we talked about that. Most of us got our contracts from where? Let's be honest. Where did you get your contract?
Internet.
The internet. So I had a case. The builder went online, got a building contract from the Home Builders Association of Kentucky. And then he changed the title to his name and company. And down at the very bottom, in the footer, it said, may not be used without permission. He forgot to take that off. Guess what happened in court? We ate him for lunch. One, the contract really didn't fit what he was doing, and two, he hadn't paid for it, because we actually said, did you pay for it? And I'd already called the HBA in Kentucky, and they didn't know who this guy was. And he had not paid for that document. He got it offline. Most of us have gotten them either online, or we worked for somebody and we took that one, or we got the AIA contract and we modified it, and we've done something with it. We've made it our own. And while that's okay, my advice is take that document and at least every 5 years, take it to your attorney or an attorney and say, here's my document. And give it to him in an electronic format because it's cheaper. And say, redline this. Tell me things I need to change if you were to have to provide legal defense of my company. I spent about $1,000 and had my contract reviewed. And the attorney said, this is great. I'm going to add this sentence. This is terrible. You got to get rid of this paragraph because that sucks. And he went through and he wrote what was considered, because you don't want a contract that's totally good for you and no one else. If it's totally good for you and not for the customer, a judge will eat you alive for that. He'll hate you. But at the same token, you want to hold yourself responsible, but you also want to get off the hook for things like, long-term water damage that they cause. And so you write those kinds of things into the contract, and then you have an attorney review it. And I know we hate to pay attorneys money. We're builders. We just don't like to do that. But it's the best money you'll spend. And then you can be safe. And you can go to a good attorney, and I know a couple who will write you a brand new contract from scratch. And that's great too. And if that's the way you want to go, go ahead. But the main thing is have an attorney review your contract. And do it about every 5 years. If you don't, you're going to be in trouble. Okay. Let's see what's next here. So here's when things go south. Specifications aren't very clear. You have a question. See something, say something. If you're not clear on something, neither are your subs. So ask the questions, preferably in the earlier stages of the project. Specs aren't referenced. If it says to do X, Y, Z and there aren't specifications referenced, refer to, drive it, ... then you better be asking questions. Because again, you're accepting that document when you accept your contract. So you want to make sure that those kinds of things are on there. Scopes of work, they're conflicting, they're not clear. If you're a trade contractor particularly, be asking the question. Now you want me to do this, right? It says this in the plan, but you told me in the bid that you wanted me to do this. Which is it? Then get it in writing. Bids that just aren't complete. Those are a real nasty one when you get to litigation, whether it's mediation, arbitration. If your contract allows your client to take you straight to court, you need to see an attorney. You better be doing mediation and arbitration long before you go to court. Most cases, if they can't be settled in a mediation, get ready to spend some serious dollars. Arbitrations aren't cheap, but they're still usually better than, and again, you let your attorney give you that legal advice, but my experience has been much better to be in arbitration than to be in court. Also, it's more quickly resolved. You don't need to have something hanging over your head for 3 years, 4 years. I've got a case right now that's going on 6 years. We met the statute of limitations, but we literally have been doing discovery, and then COVID hit, and then no trials hit. Anyway, long story short, 6 years, and it's still unresolved. And so, no one wins with that one. But make sure that the details are there. Design defects, roof transitions, we talked about that one. Unrealistic mechanical attachments. Could tell you a couple horror stories there, but just because it's on a drawing doesn't mean it will work. And we all know that. Don't be afraid to say something. The example I'll share with you was I was young in the industry. I was general manager. The owner and I were good friends. He's still one of my mentors. And we were in a large meeting. We were with a great architect. We had a great builder that we did all their work for. And we were there doing our thing. And the architect was insisting that we do this certain attachment. And there was no way on God's green earth it could happen. It just couldn't happen. But he, his vision was, oh, yes. So in a meeting with the client, he just beat us to death. And being young and naive, I sat there and listened. And when I'd had about enough of it, I posed a question. Didn't ask my boss if I could pose it. I just simply posed the question. And I handed the architect my scratch pad, and I said, would you draw what you're telling us? Because I guess I'm young and just don't understand, but I can't see how to do that. So if you'll draw that, then we can do it. Guess what? He couldn't draw it. He tried, but he couldn't draw it because he didn't know. He looked pretty stupid. The homeowner was really pissed. Our builder looked really great because all of a sudden we helped our builder say, this is a problem. Let's fix it. How do we fix it? You can't do it that way. And then we came up and said, well, here's how we're proposing to do it. The builder loved it. The homeowner loved it. The architect had to buy off on it. We didn't work for that architect ever again either. But guess what? Our builder never worked for that architect because he didn't want to work for that architect. But because that buyer was so happy, we ended up doing like 6 or 7 other, multi-million-dollar jobs because of word of mouth. And guess who the builder was? And guess who? I mean, it works both ways. But the bottom line is unrealistic mechanical attachments. Sometimes they just can't be done. Dissimilar cladding transitions, big issue. We talked about that. Whenever you have, one material coming up to another one, weather barriers behind them, there has to be proper overlap or it has to be the same type of weather barrier. And those transitions, because materials expand and contract differently, that's where the problems happen. And so that's where we see the biggest issues is at those transitions. Okay, now we're going to get into some fun photos. What's wrong with this, for goodness sakes? It's a design defect, I think. Okay, there's a flashing right down in the little bottom, but there's no step flashing, is there?
Oh, that's what I was talking about.
Yeah. So clients in Utah do not like to see flashings on stucco. They don't like to see flashings, period. But guess what? The code requires them. And most manufacturers require a minimum of 2 inches of visible flashing. And so what happens is, in this case, you go to repair that and you've got a mess. And stucco, when it gets a lot of moisture on it, gets really kind of putty-like feeling, kind of like peanut butter. So major issue around that corner. So the roof is shedding down. This is a big archway. What do you think is around that corner?
Looks like just a flat...
The roof just goes right into the stucco.
No cricket?
No cricket at all. Now, it's only about 3 feet, but there's no cricket. So water was getting into this stucco column, and no one could understand why. Hello, stucco's not waterproof. Hello, there's no cricket for the water, and there's no flashing to stop the water from sitting on. And so snow would get up in there and just be up against that, and where'd the moisture go? Well, it didn't come off the roof. Right into the stucco. Major problem. Now, lumber's pretty expensive still. It has come down a little bit. We know that. But I'm looking at this structural column and I'm going, holy, and this is before lumber was really expensive. And I'm going, how many trees do they want to use to build this house? I mean, come on, guys. And I just couldn't help myself. I'm just blown away. I mean, this is the motto, if one stud's good, then 10's better. And I'm going, whatever.
That's carrying a load.
It is carrying a load, that's for sure. A load of lumber. But then I'm looking at, I had to come back. So I came back and I'm going, what is wrong with this picture? So they've attached the railing because they're out of sequence, right? Railing's ready to go. Let's get that thing installed. We're on a deadline here. So they're attaching the railing. Excuse me, they're doing stucco. And I'm looking at this saying, there's no slope. This is stucco. That wire in that corner looks like it's been beat up with a hammer. I wonder what happened. So I walked up to it and took a close-up.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Oh, yes. So what's going to happen when they put the finished coat of stucco and moisture, snow, sits on that ledge? It's going to go in. What's going to happen to that structural column? All that wood is going to rot, and there will be a problem. Now, probably not one that I can help with, because it's probably going to happen after the statute of limitations, in honesty.
Well, with that much longer, yes.
It better be that long, right? If it was 2 2x4s, no, it wouldn't last 7 years. But yeah, with that much lumber, heavens, it might last till the millennium. Who knows? But the bottom line is, this is serious. This is the kind of stuff we see every day. In fact, I have to pinch myself and not stop to take photos when I'm driving through job sites, because it's everywhere. Now, I have to say, one of my sayings is, we're more lucky than good. You heard me say that earlier today. When I first started doing what I'm doing right now, I would wake up in the middle of the night, because I'd go on a project and I'd see something, I'd go, oh my gosh, I used to do it that way. And then I started driving around to some of the houses I'd built to see if it was still standing, if there were any issues, because we all learn from our experiences. And I'm no different. So I'm walking with my wife in a park close to our home. They're blowing insulation. And the insulation is just blowing outside these dormers as they're blowing insulation inside the house. And she says to me, what's wrong? There's a problem with that house. And so I took this picture and I said, well, yeah, there's some problems, all right. But the problem that really I focused on was the design of the dormers and how close they're together. How is anyone going to make that assembly watertight? It's literally less than that, less than 9 inches between those fascia boards. How does anyone get tools up in there? How does anyone do that? So will there be a problem on this house? The answer is yes. The family that owns it, his father's an architect, and the architect designed it. And that's what he designed.
What about the space under the windows?
Well, that's a problem too. Yeah, yeah.
Beautiful on paper.
On paper. And you know, finished, it actually is kind of cute. I mean, it is pretty, but practically speaking.
In Arizona, it wouldn't be bad.
Yeah, unless it was northern Arizona. Flagstaff, no. Tucson, sure. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, we see some very interesting details that can be avoided. And when you get into a situation, most times we can fix it. We can flash it differently. We can add flashing. We can do some things to protect ourselves. And it costs pennies on the dollar to do that. And we're thinking, we're tripping over dollar bills to pick up a penny. The bottom line is spend another $10 on some more flashing. Take another 15 minutes. But do it right. We already talked about these, the types of things that we see material defects on projects. And again, it's usually a part, a piece that's manufactured wrong. You install it and then you have a problem. PEX, anyone ever lived through the PEX dilemma when we first started using PEX piping? Yeah. What happened? They sold us on this really great product that was quicker to install and had all these wonderful features and could expand and contract. And then the fittings sucked. It wasn't the piping that was the problem, it was the fittings. So we got bid on that, didn't we? Knock on wood, I only had one house that failed, that had fitting failures. And of course, it was the one that had the finished basement. But, I was fortunate. But the reality is they stepped up, they took care of it, we fixed it, we changed out all the fittings, and we haven't had problems since. But when a new product comes out, I like early adoption. I like stuff that's new and cool, but I'm always a little hesitant to use it on a client's property till it's been tested just a little bit. My theory is wait at least a year, depends on the product, maybe 2, then be a moderate adopter. Early adoption can have its issues, just in my experience anyway. Yeah. Maybe it's just me, but that's been my experience. So I was driving down the street, I saw this site, and I hit the brakes, took a picture, and had to go find the mason. Why? Basic Rambler. What would intrigue a guy like me by seeing that on a job site? Okay, I'll help you. Remember we talked about material defects? Sand gets dumped in the dirt. They're mixing up the mortar. they get some mud in the mortar, they have brick failure. And I looked at that, and there were 2 pieces of OSB, and the sand was dumped on top of the OSB. Now, in today's world, that would be a pretty pricey little proposition. But what he did was he bought a bunch of OSB, and he just took it from job to job to job. It was ugly looking OSB, but he just took it from job to job. And he staged it, and that's where the sand got. And then he taught his crew, never, never put the shovel except on that wood, because you'll always get sand. And we'll never have a defect. So I found the guy, and I asked him that question. He told me that, and I said, so what made you do that? He said, I had some guys, and they were sloppy, and they got a lot of mud in some brick, and we lost a wall on a house. And I had to replace the whole wall. And I realized what I'd done, so I went out and bought OSB. And every job he goes to, he uses the OSB. And he uses it for years, literally. But it saves him from having that problem. Now, would he ever have that problem again? I don't know. Maybe some more training could have fixed the problem, but that was his fix. And I was impressed that A, he recognized the problem, and B, he found a simple solution that worked for him. It's not the only solution, there's others, but it worked for him. Installation defects. We talked about this again, the flashings, the barriers, weather. Had a project where we were doing stucco on a couple homes, and the weather was moving in. There was a front coming in. And it was about this time of year. It was getting colder. And I said to my one superintendent, I said, where are you at on that project? He said, we're doing brown coat. I said, okay. But pull off when it starts, you start to see some precipitation, pull off for the day. I asked the other guy, where are we at on that other house? He said, we're putting finish coat on today. This was like 7 in the morning. I said, storm's supposed to hit by 11. I said, call him up and tell him to pull off. No finish coat today. He said, okay, I'll do that. We finished talking about what we needed to do. It was a Friday. I'm at my office. I'm doing some whatever it was at my desk, and I get a phone call. It's about 12. And it's my superintendent. And I said, why are you calling? He said, I forgot to call him and pull him off the job. And I said, so they were putting finish coat on. It was a custom home down in Utah County. South wall, storm was coming in, literally took the finish coat off the wall. And so my trade is saying, hey, I need to get paid for this. I'm turning to my superintendent and say, I told you to tell him to pull off. Well, one, the trade shouldn't have done it. And two, my superintendent should have told him not to do it. So who ended up paying? Me. Improper weeps. One of the things I see frequently is that we just, especially with masonry products, we're not using weeps. The code requires weeps. Most manufacturers require weep holes. We see them all the time. I'll show you a picture in a minute. And then the weather conditions that I talked about. So this is a house where stucco and faux stone, they did a lead stone down on top of the foundation. The plan called for a metal flashing, and the house was leaking. There were no weeps at all for the moisture that, oh, shoot, what just happened? Where are we at? There we are. So what material is there?
Tar paper?
It's peel and stick flashing, flexible flashing, with a piece of roof drip edge. And the flashing doesn't even come over the top of the, I mean, let alone it's the wrong flashing, but it didn't even come over the top of it. And then they're wondering, why do we have water going in behind that stone? Well, what happens is, you've got this wall, and you've got your tar paper, your weather barrier coming down, and it's sitting, so the moisture can't get out because there's no weeps, and so what it does, it just starts filling up behind that wall. And then it goes right behind that weather barrier and goes right up and over the sill and into the basement. Can run anywhere it wants along that wall because there's nothing to stop it. The builder said, he just said flashing. I said, no, it called for metal flashing. Well, sometimes we do it this way. I said, well, you didn't put weeps in. So his stone contractor and he as a builder had to pay. This is up in Fruit Heights, up on the hill. Gets a lot of moisture, a lot of snow. They had to pay to pull off stone on that entire and redo. We were able to come up with a fix, so we pulled off the stone and pulled off their crap and put weep holes in and fixed it. We talked about concrete being an issue and settlement issues being a big one. This is an example of that. This large custom home was being built down in Cedar City. They put the foundation, the footings were all put in, and then they did the foundation walls because they were in a hurry just for the structure, the house. They didn't do the garage. It was like a 6-car garage. And they were going to come back and do that after they got the framing going. I don't know why. And so they drilled into the wall to dowel to connect this cold joint. What did they forget to do? They actually epoxied, but they forgot to blow the holes out. And so they put the epoxy in, and then they rammed the rebar in, and the rebar got really lots of epoxy and concrete dust, but it didn't bond to the wall. And so they had poor water management. The water settled, the wall fell away. This is a 10-foot tall wall. You can look by my tape. It varies from 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch wide on a 10-foot wall, 8-inch wide with rebar. And it literally sheared. What would cause that?
Ground settling?
Or push heaving.
It was actually both. It had soils that were both mixed. This is the one that had the mixed soils. And the reality was, who made the comment about the fill? Was that you, Steve, talking about the guy that didn't want to pay for the structural fill? Guess what they didn't do? Engineers said you need to do structural fill here. And they said, but we can get compaction. We don't need structural fill. And they were on top of those types of soils. So what happened? Boom. Moisture gets there. Now, last time I checked, 8-inch thick concrete walls with rebar per engineering code is pretty stiff, pretty solid stuff. And yet when it can move like that and crack like that, it's pretty amazing.
They crack like that all the time in Colorado because the
Yeah, just because of the soils. Oklahoma, another big issue. Oklahoma has terrible soils. Okay, this is that same house down by Cedar City. Couple problems with this house. What do you see?
Is that the foundation?
That is the foundation, that is a footing on the corner.
No coverage.
No coverage. No frost coverage at all. What else do you see?
downspout too close to it.
Downspout, no drainage 10 feet away, doesn't meet code. So when this thing drops water, what happens? What do you think? This is a master bathroom right up above it with a tiled wall and shower and tub. What do you think's happening right above this that you can't see? Oh my gosh. Complete redo on that house. What a mess. I'll just say that. Could all been resolved if they had a... Oh, I should go back. So when this house was designed, what was interesting was it's drawn on a flat lot. It's a walkout. And so the step footings aren't shown. So that was determined on site. And they all missed that footing and that lower patio. They should have put that sucker at least 32 inches deeper. And they would have been fine. 30 inches technically. And they would have been fine. But they didn't. And then drain the water away. We see this a lot where we start having some homes cracking and settling. And we look at the downspout attachment and we're going, why did that downspout, when it, we know that that pipe was in that probably at least 2 or 3 inches, maybe 4. That's a lot of movement. Should the homeowner be responsible for this? They certainly shoulder some of it. But why did it settle that far? Because it wasn't properly compacted. So we dig these holes for these beautiful homes for the basements. And even if we don't, we have what we call the over dig. And then when we backfill, and I can't tell you how many guys I see doing it, they just throw the dirt back in and then they compact the top. Well, they'll get a compaction on the top, but it's not compacted in lifts. So the minute moisture, and we've been in a drought, typically what happens is you'll have 6 or 7 years of drought and then 6 or 7 years of wet years. And what happens is if it was built during the dry and then it gets wet, if it was built during the wet and then it gets dry, not quite so bad. But you get that movement of the soils below. I asked an old engineer friend of mine, he'd been around for a long, long time. I said, how long does it take for soil in its native state to compact to what you would say 95% or plus? He said, well, that's a tough question. What do you think he told me?
It's like 10 or 15 years, something like that.
A million years, maybe
30 years.
He said if it's just a pile of dirt, you know, he said 100 years, plus or minus 10. He said if you compact it on top and it's 95%, 98%, but you haven't compacted it in lifts, he said you'll see significant settlement in about a year, maybe 2, regardless of the weather conditions. He said if you lift it in 9-inch or 12-inch lifts, depending on what your soils report tells you to do and your engineer tells you to do, he said you'll have minimal compaction issues. He said your home won't settle. Now, we know homes settle. How much, when we build a home, how much does a home settle naturally with everything being perfect? Does it settle? What happens? Come on, you guys are smart.
Quarter inch?
Quarter inch.
Couple inches?
Couple inches. Average is 1 inch to 1.5 inches. If everything's perfect and you start building that home and then you start loading it and then the people move in, and over the course of the first couple of years, that home's going to go 1 inch to 1.5 inches. Naturally, if everything's perfect. So you better take that into account when you're connecting downspouts and those other things. Give it some flux. It's going to do it. You might as well know that it does it and then plan for it. Weep holes, we talked about that. This was this project. We said, okay, why did they use metal flashing on the back of the house but not the front of the house? Well, when we first figured this out, we thought, well, we can remove the mortar very, very carefully and we can create weep holes. And then when we're done creating them, they'll look like that and then we'll remortar the joints. And then I got a phone call and they said, Mark, it's not a metal flashing underneath. And that's why we had to pull it all off on that earlier picture, because we thought we could fix it this way. But we couldn't fix it that way. We had a major problem. We see this with stucco where there's not enough coverage. The wire mesh begins to show. It gets rusty and nasty. This particular house, this is the one where above I showed you the archway with all the water coming down. It was coming down the wall. And so it was causing this kind of an issue in a freeze-thaw cycle. And it was degrading, and now more water was getting into the wall as a result of that. The original problem was up on top on the roof. But then it worked its way down, and then it started having problems throughout the whole wall and making the problem bigger. What's wrong with this one? Where?
Lack thereof?
So this is real stone. It's not faux stone. So we're talking 4 to 6 inches of river rock that was installed with no flashing, but it's sitting on top of the roof.
On the shingles.
That's on top of the shingle. Now I have 2 questions. One, how do you ever replace the roof? Because you're going to have to. And number 2, how do you keep water from getting into that wall? And you can't. There's no lintel. The roof sheeting is the lintel for this stone. Big, big issue.
7/16 can't hold that solid rock?
Well, it was. It was. But I'm sure there would come a point in time when it started to degrade that, yeah, it was going to be pretty nasty. We caught it 3 years into the process. So I don't know what would have happened. I'm sure it would have. Faucets. You know, we have these freezeless faucets and we just stick them in the wall wherever we think we need to put them, and they're great, and homeowners love to have more than less. But we don't think through, I'm picking on plumbers and builders right now, we don't think through the guys that are going to do the cladding, you know, the siding, the stucco, the brick. Most companies, Woodford being one of them, have a flange where you actually mount the flange to the wall, and that stays loose. The hose bib stays loose. You put the cladding on around that flange, it's sealed, and then you just slide it back in and put 2 screws and you're done. This one wasn't done that way. We had water in the basement below this, and everyone's scratching their head, and I walk around the back, and I'm looking at the wall, and I walk up to the hose bib, and I pulled the hose bib. And I go, huh, amazing, no sealant at all. And you look at that and you say, but it's so little. An average 2,400 square foot Rambler, 2,000 to 2,400 square foot Rambler. We have these penetrations, don't we? Not counting doors and windows, what would be the sum total in terms of a size of all those penetrations if you were to add them all and put them in one spot in the house?
24 by 24.
Say it again, 24 by 24?
4 foot by 4 foot.
4 foot by 4 foot? Well, you're both right. It's about 3 by 3 if you add those all together. And so do we seal those penetrations? Do we do anything about them? I was building a custom home up on the East Bench, and client called and said, we've got water coming in our grand entry. And so I go up there, and they've got buckets and this gorgeous tile entry. It's chandelier. It's just gorgeous. And water's just coming down off that sheetrock like a sieve and coming through the light fixture. So I went and turned that circuit off. And then I'm thinking, what do we do? So I called my roofer. And so he went up and looked at it, tried to figure it out, did a water test, and put some mastic here and there. And he says, got it taken care of. I said, great. So I told the owner, everything's good. So it rains again, and I get another phone call. Mark, it's coming in again just as much as before. And so I was in a meeting. I said, I'll get done as quick as I can, I'll come up. Well, by the time I got up there, it was just barely dripping. And I thought, crap. So I got my stucco guy and I got my roof guy, and we went back out. They couldn't find anything. And I'm kind of like, golly, I was there. I saw the water. I know it's coming in. What's happening? Flashing looked good. Transitions looked good. Roofing looked good. I'm going, man, I can't figure this out. So I said to Mr. Homeowner, who was a good client, Russell, the next time it starts to rain, you call. I'll tell my staff, no matter what I'm doing, tell me you're on the phone. I will stop what I'm doing. I will get in the car. I will come to the house. We'll figure this out. He said, okay. So when you tell somebody you're going to do something, you can screw up a lot in this business, and as long as you take really good care of them and fix it, you're golden. You don't fix it, you're toast. So he called me. Sure enough, I'm in a meeting, and I excused myself. I'm in slacks and a tie and a button down and dress shoes, and I go to the house. And I took off my dress shoes and put on my boots, and I pulled off my tie and pulled out a ladder, and I'm looking and I'm getting drenched, and I'm trying to figure out, where's this water coming in? So I climbed up in the attic with a tape measure and a flashlight. And I'm looking and I'm looking and I'm looking, and I see water running down one of the joists to this area. The water's not even coming from that area. It's coming from way up here. And so I'm loving it. I'm laying in insulation in a pair of slacks. My wife's going to really be happy when I get home. And I find this spot of water. And I'm going, wow, this is really weird. It can't be this simple. So I called my roofer, and I said, I found it. And so we go up on the roof, and we put out the tape measure approximately where I were, and we start checking shingles. Guess what we found? A single 16-penny nail hole that the stucco guy had used to tarp, put some plastic down, some visqueen on the roof to keep it from getting dirty, and he nailed the 2x4. And when he was done and cleaned up, he would lift up a shingle and put a little squirt of sealant and put the shingle back down. He missed one hole. Do you know how big a hole is through roofing when it's done with a 16-penny nail? Tiny. But when there's wind behind it, and when you have the temperature and the pressure differentials from outside to inside, it's like a wick. It just sucks that water through that itty bitty little hole. I had to replace an entire entry with all this gorgeous tile and all this drywall of this beautiful home to fix a single 16-penny nail hole that my stucco guy had put in. Simple. But it cost me a fortune because it wasn't sealed. I can't stress making sure penetrations, whoever makes them and why ever they make them. Number one, don't make them if you don't have to. Number two, if you do make them, seal them properly because it will cost somebody. Dryer vent. I could look through the hole and I could see the OSB. I'm going, where's the weather barrier? Well, when they cut the hole, after the fact, to put the dryer vent here, I found out later, it shredded the weather barrier and they didn't fix it. And so water's getting in, south facing, plenty of water getting in this area and causing some damage below. So we had to literally pull the stone off and fix it. Okay, this was one in Daybreak out here in South Jordan. I'm driving like I always do. And I'm looking at the detail around the window. And I'm saying, man, they didn't really plane that out very nicely. It's going to get painted, but it's really kind of crappy. Back to fit and finish. Remember that discussion we had? I'm going, kind of ugly. Looking at those vertical on the windows and how they're kicked out. I'm going, man, I would never accept that. And then I saw something. And I said, I got to look at this. Look at the upper left corner of the headpiece. You see that little dot above the caulking? So they're going to paint this, and water, when you get a little bit of wind-driven rain, and the pressure differential in the house is going to suck water into that window assembly. And then it's going to fail, and they're going to say it's the window's fault. Someone didn't install the window right. It's not the window's fault. It's the trim guy who simply didn't do a clean job, nor did he fix the problem that he caused. I was nice enough, I knew the builder, so I sent him a photograph and said, hey, you may want to fix this before you paint, because your painter's like right there. I'm looking at this, and the builder said, this is finished. This is a step foundation, stone, and right where the stone at that 90 degree, you can see there's a big crack there. Well, someone knocked the corner off the foundation, so they patched it, and they did a very poor job. And then they came in and they installed the window, and you can see the grace flashing there that was done around the window. And this is finished. So my question is, can water get into that assembly? Absolutely, because that's not finished. I saw this one, and I had to stop and take a picture. I'm looking at this. We see this all the time. Big, massive coach lights, stone or rock. And I'm looking at the box at the top, and I'm going, it's not even sealed. How are they going to keep water? And this is a structural column on a big canopy porch. How are they going to keep this dry? That was the question in my mind. So I got out of my car, took this picture, and then I walked around the other side, and I looked at the box. Then I got my ladder, and I climbed up, and I'm looking at it, and the wire is not coming down from the top of the wall through a hole in the top of the box. The wire is coming through the bottom of the box. So when water gets in there, where's the water going to go? Immediately into that wood column. And there's going to be major, major issues. I showed this at a class a few weeks ago, and it just happened that my former electrician was in the audience. And I said, hey, Steve, what would you do if this was you on a job? Mr. Electrician, how would you resolve that issue? He said, I'd go back to the builder and tell them to change out where they put the light, because they make sconces that mount in stone, and they come in concrete, and they come in composite materials that are flat, and you mount that on the wall on top of the weather barrier, and then you mount your electrical to that, and it's flat, and you can paint it. You can do it in stone and then do other stone that looks the same, and you have a flat surface that you can now seal. Because there's no way you can seal that, ever. It's just not going to happen. Okay, we're going to, I like showing photos. It tells the story. I'm sorry. I'm going to end on this one. Then we're going to take another break, and then we'll shift to a different course. So I knew the builder. I knew the homeowner. The homeowner was my son. He'd lived in the house about a year, brand new home. And he called me up and said, Dad, our sewer backed up. It's in the basement. I said, okay. So I gave him a number. I said, call and have them come, run a snake through there. You're the grandson of a plumber. You know what you have to do here. Go fix it. So he called me back. He said, they came out, and they said at 30 feet, they hit an obstruction, and they can't go any more than 30 feet. What do I do? I said, well, you pack up your bags, and you and your wife and kids come over to our house and stay in the basement while we figure this out. I said, we'll call a different guy, and he's a water jet guy, and he'll go in and he'll shoot a water jet through there. And if he can't get through the blockage, it'll clean it out enough that we can take a photo and see what it is. So we did. Put a camera down there with a water jet. And this is what I see. Now, this is a 4-inch sewer lateral from a house to the street. That's what you're looking in. What do you think you're seeing?
Gravel?
Gravel. Looked like big tennis balls, but yeah, gravel. And I'm thinking, holy crap, that is some big gravel. And then I'm kind of like, So I'm putting my head together, I'm thinking, okay. So I call the builder. Short story is I said, Mr. Builder, you screwed up. Someone broke this line. And he said, there's no way it would have lasted a year. They flushed something down the toilet. And I said, no. Here's the photo. It's gravel. You've got a break in the line, and yes, it could go a year or two and then finally back up. And he said, you can't prove that. And I said, I can when we dig it out. I said, now why don't you call your guy and have the excavator come back who put it in and did the dig and dig it out. He said, well, you do it and then I'll reimburse you if you're right. I said, it's going to cost you a whole lot more if I do it that way. I said, if I'm wrong, let's do it at the least cost possible. I'm not going to charge you for a hotel bill for my son and his family to be in my house. I'm not going to charge you, dinners. We'll take care of them for a few days. Get this arranged. So anyway, he decided it was the contractor he had hired to do the subdivision and put the actual infrastructure in the main sewer lines. So on the appointed day, we all showed up. And the excavator digs down 13 feet deep to get to this sewer. And sure enough, this is what we found. A break in the line. Now, I don't have to be too graphic, but this has been going on for a year. And it's sewer. And they're all like, eh. And I'm the son of a plumber, so I threw on my boots and I went down the ladder. And we got a shovel and we picked through. And he said, well, no, that's not our fault. He said, it's the guy that did the infrastructure. They put a piece of broken pipe in. I said, no, you guys, when you dug the hole, actually hooked onto the lateral and you pulled it apart and broke it. Because I could take any 3 of you guys and have you try to pull that pipe apart, and you can't. Once you put it together, it's there. That O-ring bites, and it's there. Have you ever tried to pull one of those apart? Can't do it. So the bottom line is, I said, that's the problem. So we dug it out, and we did our thing, and we flushed it through, and they repaired it, and everything was working great. And then we took a piece that they'd cut, and we pulled up the piece, and literally you could see the black line from the O-ring, and you could see the fractured piece. And it was so clear that they had literally pulled it and lifted it, and it broke that joint. The minute the excavating company, engineering, it was an E100 contractor, saw what I'd laid out on the lawn, he just said, thank you, Mark, I'm out of here, because it's not my problem. And he got in his truck and he left. And the builder turned to the excavator and said, Mark's right, it's on us. We screwed up. The bottom line is, in our industry, I go back to the comment that Jim Collins made. It really is simple. Most of what we do is not super, super technical. Can be at times, but most of what we do all the time. We know how to do it. We're pretty good at it. But when we get in a hurry, when our trades get in a hurry, we start to make mistakes. When we don't focus on those simple things, doing it the right process, the right time, every single step of the way, bad things happen. And I'm here to tell you, when bad things happen, usually it's costly. And usually you're going to be the guys, as I'm looking at this group today, that are going to be involved in that fixing process, and it's going to take some money. That's it for construction defects. Questions, comments? I've still got a whole bunch of pictures, because you never know how long and what people are going to say or talk about. So, I've got some other pictures, but we could go on. I got done early one day, and I said, you guys want to just look at pictures? And they said, yeah, let's just look at pictures. One of the most common mistakes I see, sheeting on the outside of a wall, not gapped. On a roof, causes the roof to buckle, the shingles to show it, causes stucco to have all kinds of issues and cracking, causes hardy board to do really strange things, because it does pick up some moisture and it doesn't expand. Can you imagine this wall with wood that's, let's say, 10% moisture content, and then really hot day, and there's no gap, there's no place for that wood to move, what it's going to do to hardy board, it's amazing. It'll shear nails. It just does all kinds of crazy things. This is one of those common mistakes we find. When I train companies and we bring their framers in, I'm always amazed at how many framers don't know that the manufacturer specification for every brand of OSB on the market today requires a 1/8 inch gap. In fact, I even had a framer tell me, well, I was putting on T&G floor and I can't get it to go tight. I said, it's not supposed to go tight. It's milled so there's a 1/8 gap at the top so it can expand and contract. In fact, if you look at it on a side profile, it doesn't go all the way in. It's meant to stop. He goes, well, why? We need to spend more time training ourselves, our staff, each other, and specifically work with our trades. They're really smart, and if we're really engaging them in the process, we will make a lot less mistakes. And listen to them. When they tell us, hey, don't do it that way. Usually they've been bit and they know not to do that. Let's take a break.